Now, you got another film coming up, I hear, but it probably haven't started yet, called The Resurrection. It's a sequel to The Passion of the Christ. Is that true?
It's probably about 3 years off because it's a big subject.
What if the Bible you're reading today isn't the Bible? Not fake, not wrong, just one version that survived. Because for a long time, people assumed the text was sacred, fixed, carefully copied, word for word, across centuries. But then something strange happened. Scientists got access to the Dead Sea Scrolls, not just to read them, but to test them. They extracted ancient DNA from the parchment itself. And what they found didn't just raise questions about who wrote the Bible. It raised questions about how many versions were circulating at the same time and why some disappeared. Even Mel Gibson, someone known for pushing extreme biblical accuracy in his films, was reportedly caught off guard by what this suggests. Because this wasn't about translation errors, this was about competing texts. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Before we dive into this incredible scientific discovery, we need to understand why and how the legendary director became completely entangled with this ancient mystery. The Hollywood maverick and the ancient mystery. Mel Gibson is popularly known around the world for his intense dedication to bringing history to life on the big screen. When he made his masterpiece about the final days of Jesus, he did something almost unheard of in modern Hollywood. During the shooting of the film, Gibson required his actors to learn and speak only ancient Aramaic and Latin to make the movie feel as real as possible. This level of commitment shows how deeply he cares about getting the details right. He wants the audience to feel as though they have stepped into a literal time machine, experiencing history exactly as it happened. Right now, the legendary director is actively mapping out a highly anticipated sequel, focusing on the resurrection of the Christ. And because of this massive project, he is constantly on the lookout for the newest archaeological breakthroughs to give his storytelling total authenticity. He does not want to rely on old assumptions or dry textbook descriptions. Instead, he wants the latest evidence that paints a clear picture of what life was really like in that ancient world, making every scene feel raw and accurate.
What our great stories are about individuals like this, who show us what we're capable of as people.
This burning curiosity explains why the massive news in 2020 caught the eye of filmmakers and historians alike. This was exactly the year scientists successfully extracted and sequenced DNA from the Dead Sea Scrolls. For a storyteller who seeks the raw, unfiltered truth rather than standard academic theories, this was a game changer. It proved that modern biology could unlock secrets that human eyes had missed for thousands of years. You see, connecting a major Hollywood figure to thousands of years of religious history might seem a bit unexpected at first. Yet, it perfectly highlights the bridge between our culture's deep fascination with ancient mysteries and the incredible revelations happening in laboratories today. People everywhere are hungry for the real story of the past, and high-tech science is finally delivering answers that traditional history books simply could not provide. For more than 70 years, researchers only studied the scrolls by reading the actual words written on them. Gibson and the rest of the world were absolutely stunned to realize that the physical material of the scrolls held a completely different story. The animal skins used to make the parchment contained a biological secret that text alone could never convey. It was a whole new way of looking at these ancient artifacts. This discovery proved that the history of the Bible is far more complex, dramatic, and interconnected than scholars ever believed. It provided the exact kind of epic, nuanced lore that a visionary filmmaker dreams of finding.
Now, I believe that the kinds of films that we used to make used to be studio films are now kind of like independent films.
To truly understand why this extraction left both Hollywood directors and top-tier scholars completely speechless, let's rewind to a dark desert cave where this massive mystery originally began. The enigma of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd boy was searching for a lost goat near the Dead Sea at Qumran. While searching, he came across a cave and tossed a rock into the cave opening. By doing so, he heard an unexpected sound of clay jars breaking. Intrigued and curious at that, the Bedouin shepherd boy climbed inside to investigate, and what he stumbled upon was the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Inside those ancient jars were leather scrolls wrapped in linen. These manuscripts dated back over 2,000 years, making them the oldest known biblical writings in existence. Now, finding texts that are old and preserved so well was incredibly rare, because for centuries, historians had relied on copies of the Bible written much later. So seeing these original documents felt as though researchers were looking directly at the very roots of history. The scale of the discovery grew much larger over the next few years as researchers kept exploring. Archaeologists eventually uncovered roughly 25,000 fragments across 11 different caves in the area. These broken pieces represented about 1,000 distinct manuscripts. The collection included copies of ancient biblical books, religious hymns, and specific rules for community living, creating a massive, chaotic puzzle that experts would spend the next several decades trying to piece together. For more than 70 years, only a single explanation dominated the academic world and became known as the Essene theory. Most scholars agreed that the scrolls belonged to a specific group called the Essenes. They described the Essenes as an isolated and highly strict Jewish sect that chose to live far away from mainstream society in the harsh Qumran desert. According to this widely taught story, these people left the busy city of Jerusalem to live a quiet life focused on copying sacred texts. They built a settlement and maintained a large library. When the Roman army marched through the area during a major revolt in 68 before the Common Era, the Essenes rushed to hide their precious library in the nearby caves to protect it from destruction, leaving them perfectly sealed for 2 millennia. This explanation became the standard truth taught in universities and shown in museum exhibits. It framed every documentary and historical movie made about the subject. As time went by, everyone viewed the scrolls as the exclusive property of one small radical fringe group living on the edge of the desert. No other ideas really gained traction because this story seemed to explain everything perfectly for a long time. While the Essene theory was accepted as absolute fact, a massive 25,000-piece puzzle, with most of its pieces missing, was about to expose the severe cracks in that very foundation. The 70-year scholarly deadlock. For 70 years, the academic world found itself in a state of total gridlock. These scholars were not working with intact books or clean pages. Instead, they were facing a mountain of tiny, brittle fragments from 400 manuscripts that had been shattered by time. There were no page numbers, no titles, and no table of contents to guide them. It was like trying to assemble 1,000 different jigsaw puzzles after someone threw all the pieces into one giant box and took away the pictures on the covers. To make sense of this mess, researchers had to act like forensic investigators. They spent their lives hunched over magnifying glasses, trying to match one scrap of leather to another. Their only tools were handwriting analysis and comparing the physical texture of the parchment. They looked at how thick a piece was, or the specific color of the skin. This process was incredibly subjective, because if 2 pieces of leather looked similar and the handwriting seemed to match, a scholar might decide they belonged together. However, there was never a way to be entirely sure, because the stakes of this work were incredibly high. If a researcher accidentally joined 2 fragments that did not actually belong to the same scroll, they risked creating a completely false biblical reading. And it would not be a minor error. These mistakes could mislead thousands of years of theological study and change how we understand ancient religious traditions. One wrong move could attribute words to an ancient author that they never actually wrote. So, this fear of making a mistake kept the field in a state of cautious, slow-moving tension for decades. As time passed, some experts started noticing strange anomalies that did not fit the standard story. They found copies of the same biblical books that had massive variations in the text. Some fragments used different scripts or were written on wildly different qualities of parchment. Some pieces looked like they were prepared by professional scribes in a city, while others were rough and poorly made. These inconsistencies suggested that the scrolls might have come from many different places, yet the dominant theory remained that they were all produced by one small group in the desert. Everyone wanted more evidence, but their hands were tied. And because these scrolls are considered sacred treasures by multiple religions, any form of invasive testing was strictly forbidden. Scientists could not cut samples or drill into the artifacts to learn more about their chemistry. The scrolls were too fragile and too precious to risk damaging. This meant that traditional archaeology had hit a brick wall, and there was no way to go deeper using the old methods of looking and guessing. By the early 2000s, the field was desperate for a fresh perspective. Researchers had squeezed every possible drop of information out of the visible ink and the physical shapes of the fragments. They needed a miracle to break this academic deadlock, and this miracle would arrive not from an archaeologist, but from a casual meeting between two brilliant scientists that would change history forever. A meeting that changed the biblical history. During a university retreat in 2012 at Tel Aviv University, a molecular biologist named Oded Rechavi and a biblical scholar named Noam Mizrahi sat down together to talk about the ongoing frustrations of Dead Sea Scrolls research. But neither of them knew they were about to flip the entire field of archaeology on its head. Noam Mizrahi began explaining the massive headache scholars had faced for 7 decades. He described the thousands of tiny, fragmented pieces of parchment.
Differentiate between the different fragments on each image and identify them in different images
That refused to fit together. He talked about the constant fear of making a mistake and accidentally creating a false version of history based on nothing more than a lucky guess or a subjective opinion about handwriting. For a long time, the walls of the humanities had felt completely solid, leaving no room for a new way forward. Rechavi, however, listened to these problems with the perspective of someone who spent his days looking at cells and genetic codes rather than ancient pottery or dusty ink. To put it out there, he was not an expert in the Bible or ancient languages. And because he came from a totally different world of science, he looked at the artifacts through a much different lens. He asked a question that was incredibly basic, yet totally revolutionary. He asked what the scrolls were actually made of. Mizrahi, on the other hand, explained that the scrolls were written on parchment, which is essentially processed animal skin. At that moment, Rechavi paused and pointed out a fact that seems obvious now, but had never been used this way before. He realized that if the scrolls were made of animal skin, then the parchment must contain DNA. It was a biological realization that changed the entire conversation. If the genetic code was still there, it meant the scrolls were not only historical documents, but also biological samples. This meeting marked the exact second where molecular biology collided with biblical archaeology. It opened up a brand new discipline that no one had ever considered. The two scientists realized that if they could successfully extract and sequence that ancient DNA from the parchment, they could solve the puzzle once and for all. They could prove that two separate fragments belonged together by showing they came from the same exact individual animal. This ambitious hypothesis promised to remove all human guesswork from the equation. Instead of debating over the style of a certain letter or the shade of the leather, they could let the DNA do the talking. It was the ultimate way to verify history with the precision of a modern crime lab. While the idea was completely revolutionary, it faced a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. How could they extract DNA from 2,000-year-old and ultra-fragile sacred texts without destroying them? Cracking the genetic code. The Israel Antiquities Authority is the gatekeeper of these treasures, and they have strict rules against any kind of damage. As small as cutting even a tiny bit or drilling a small hole into the scrolls was strictly forbidden. This meant the team had to invent a completely non-invasive way to harvest the genetic information without leaving a single mark on the artifacts. Now, the solution came from a stroke of genius involving something most people would ignore. Over the 7 decades that scholars had handled and stored these fragments, so tiny microscopic particles of parchment dust had naturally worn off and settled at the bottom of their storage containers. With this, scientists realized they did not need to cut the scrolls because the scrolls were already shedding. They decided to carefully collect this discarded dust from the blank margins and damaged areas where no writing existed, so they could easily isolate ancient DNA. This allowed them to gather the building blocks of life without ever touching or altering the actual text. However, even with the dust in hand, extracting viable genetic material was a total nightmare. The ancient process of making parchment involved heavy soaking and scraping, which naturally breaks down DNA. On top of that, the corrosive iron-based inks used by the ancient scribes had spent 2,000 years eating away at the delicate molecules. The DNA was not just old, it was fragmented and chemically scarred by centuries of exposure to the elements and the materials used to create the scrolls in the first place. The biggest hurdle was even human contamination. Since their discovery in 1947, these scrolls had been touched by Bedouin finders, various archaeologists, and generations of scholars. Every time someone breathed on or handled a fragment without gloves, they left behind their own modern DNA. The samples were a messy soup of genetic information, but the team had to figure out how to tell the difference between a 20th century professor and a 2,000-year-old desert goat or sheep. To solve this, they moved the operation into ultra-sterile ancient DNA laboratories. The researchers wore full protective suits and worked in rooms with positive air pressure to keep outside dust away. Using advanced forensic techniques, they spent years filtering out the modern human traces to find the degraded ancient animal sequences hidden underneath. It was painstaking work that required incredible patience and a level of precision usually reserved for high-stakes criminal investigations. After years of labor in those sterile clean rooms and filtering out thousands of years of molecular noise, the genetic results were finally printed out, and they immediately shattered 70 years of established historical consensus. The cow versus sheep revelation. For decades, the academic world was locked into one specific narrative. Scholars had always assumed that the people living at Qumran raised their own local animals to produce the parchment for their scrolls, which made perfect sense because sheep and goats are incredibly hardy. These animals are highly adapted to the harsh, arid conditions of the Dead Sea Desert, where water is scarce and the sun is brutal. It was a logical conclusion that the scrolls were local products created by local people. But then, the DNA results sent a massive shockwave through that comfortable theory. When the genetic data came back, most of the tested fragments were indeed confirmed to be cow skin, which matched the desert environment. However, the testing uncovered a biological impossibility that no one expected. Several critical fragments were unmistakably identified as being made from cow skin. To a casual observer, this might seem like a minor detail, yet to a historian, it was a total game changer. Well, cows are nothing like desert goats. They require massive amounts of fresh water and lush green pastures to survive and thrive. And when we look deeper, Qumran is one of the driest and most barren rock deserts in the entire region. It is a place of salt and stone, where keeping cattle was ecologically impossible 2,000 years ago. There was no way a small, isolated group of monks in that specific desert could have raised cows to make parchment. This biological fact proved beyond any doubt that scrolls written on cow skin could not have originated in the Qumran settlement. Immediately, this discovery broke the long-standing monopoly that Qumran had over the scrolls. It meant these specific manuscripts had to be imported from wetter, resource-rich regions of ancient Judea, perhaps even from the bustling city of Jerusalem. The data delivered a fatal blow to the idea that the Dead Sea Scrolls were exclusively the private library of a single isolated desert sect. The story of a lonely group of people writing in total isolation was falling apart in the face of genetic evidence. And now, the new picture of history was much more vibrant and connected than anyone had imagined. It proved that the scrolls were traveling across a much wider geographic network. These sacred texts were moving between different Jewish communities, being shared and traded before they eventually ended up hidden in those famous caves. The desert was not a dead end for these books. It was a destination for a library that belonged to the entire region. While the geographical revelation was just the beginning, the extracted DNA would next settle one of the most fierce, decades-long debates in biblical scholarship regarding a famous prophet. Rewriting the Book of Jeremiah. For many years, experts were puzzled by the fragments of the Book of Jeremiah found in the caves. They discovered that the collection contained two drastically different versions of the exact same sacred text. One version was long and looked very similar to the Jeremiah found in our modern Bibles today. The other version, however, was significantly shorter and had a completely different order of chapters. This strange discrepancy sparked a massive debate among historians that lasted for generations. Some scholars argued that the differences were nothing more than human error. They believed that careless monks at the desert settlement made mistakes while copying the texts, skipping lines, or mixing up the order. But other experts disagreed strongly, suggesting that these two scrolls represented genuinely different ancient traditions that existed side by side. Without a physical way to prove where the scrolls came from, the argument remained at a total standstill for decades. On another spectrum, the new DNA technology offered a definitive verdict. Scientists decided to analyze the animal skins of both conflicting versions of the Book of Jeremiah to see if they were biologically connected. If the fragments came from the exact same flock of animals, it would suggest they were made in the same place at the same time. But if they came from different animals entirely, it would tell a completely different story about their origins. Once the results came out, the genetics revealed a clear separation between the two texts. Scientists discovered that the shorter version of Jeremiah was written on cow parchment, pointing to its origin in a much more fertile region outside the desert. On the other hand, the longer version was written on sheep parchment, which fit perfectly with the arid desert environment. This biological evidence provided the hard proof that scholars had been searching for. It proved that the two versions were not the result of scribal errors or random variations produced by a single community. Instead, they were distinct textual traditions preserved by entirely different communities living in different geographical locations. For the first time, researchers had hard evidence that multiple versions of the same biblical book were considered valid and sacred by different groups of people, each with their own history. This revelation profoundly changed our understanding of the Bible. It showed that during the Second Temple period, Scripture was incredibly fluid and diverse. There was no single authorized version of these holy books yet, but multiple valid versions circulated at the exact same time before a single religious canon was ever locked in place. With physical and textual evidence proving that these scrolls came from multiple communities, the long-held myth of the Essene monopoly was about to be completely demolished, changing history forever. Shattering the Essene monopoly. Instead of looking at the caves at Qumran as a private library belonging to a single desert cult, many scholars now recognize them as something entirely different. They believe these caves served as a genizah. In ancient Jewish tradition, a genizah is a holy storage space where worn-out or conflicting sacred texts are placed. Because these documents contained the written name of God, they could not be destroyed or thrown in the trash. Instead, they had to be retired respectfully. This explains why so many different versions of the same books, including hymns and community rules, were gathered in one place, stored safely away from human contact. Another powerful theory that is gaining a lot of support is the refugee theory. This idea is heavily backed through DNA evidence showing that many scrolls were imported from far away. Between the years 68 and 70 before the Common Era, the Roman army was marching toward Jerusalem to crush a massive Jewish rebellion. As frightened citizens and priests fled the burning city, they carried their precious, diverse libraries with them into the desert caves for safekeeping, protecting their history from the invaders. They hoped to return for them one day, leaving behind a perfectly preserved archive of their culture that would remain untouched for 2 millennia. Instead of reflecting a small, isolated fringe community, the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal a broad picture of Judaism across ancient Judea. They form an extensive collection that highlights a wide range of religious ideas, discussions, and interpretations. This suggests a dynamic culture shaped by diverse traditions rather than a single uniform belief system. The movement of these texts, from fertile regions to desert areas, indicates strong connections between Jerusalem and nearby communities. People regularly traveled, shared writings, and exchanged perspectives. This vibrant intellectual environment later influenced the development of both Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, offering valuable insight into the world in which Jesus and his followers lived. And this profound realization of a diverse, interconnected ancient world with competing theological ideas is exactly why the discovery resonates so deeply with artistic truth seekers like Mel Gibson. Why this shocked Mel Gibson and the world? While the director has not made any statement about these specific DNA results, we can easily understand how this breakthrough fits his famous cinematic philosophy. As a filmmaker, he has always been fascinated by pulling back the polished layers of history. He loves to show the raw, gritty, and authentic reality of the past. He does not want a clean, safe version of history. He wants the dirt, the sweat, and the real human struggles that actually took place thousands of years ago. And this discovery reveals a past that is every bit as complex and untamed as the movies he creates. The new understanding of the Dead Sea Scrolls offers a much richer backdrop for his highly anticipated project about the resurrection. Discovering that ancient Judean religion was not a single identical block of thought, instead being a vivid array of competing ideas and diverse communities, provides incredible dramatic potential. For a visual storyteller, this is pure gold. It means the world Jesus walked in was filled with passionate debates, different cultural movements, and deeply held beliefs that clashed in the streets. It gives any future biblical film a far more complex, textured, and cinematic setting, making the history feel alive rather than frozen in a museum display. Some people might worry that proving the Bible had multiple fluid versions in the past threatens modern faith. However, storytellers and deep thinkers often view this very differently. Rather than seeing it as a threat, they see a massive enrichment to the story of humanity. This biological data shows the profound human dedication to preserving sacred texts across vast landscapes. People cared so much about these words that they carried them through deserts and protected them in caves during times of war. It shows a deep, living connection to the divine that was shared by many different groups of people. So it's safe to say that the discovery validates a core belief in filmmaking. When we look closer at the physical, historical reality using the best tools available, the truth we find is always far more breathtaking and epic than fiction. We do not need to invent fictional stories when the real history is very fascinating and full of surprises. Often viewed as enemies, modern molecular biology and ancient theology actually work together here to illuminate lost chapters of human history that traditional methods could never solve. Well, the revolutionary blend of genetics and archaeology is only the first step, leaving the world to wonder what other ancient secrets are currently waiting to be decoded in a lab. Where do we go from here? The future of molecular archaeology. The successful DNA sequencing of the Dead Sea Scrolls has officially birthed the era of molecular archaeology for ancient manuscripts worldwide. It turns out that the skin of the animal the text was written on has as much to tell us as the actual words themselves. This new field bridges the gap between hard science and human history, taking us deeper into the past than we ever dreamed possible. Scientists are currently building massive databases of ancient animal DNA to cross-reference with parchment artifacts. By comparing the genetic code of the animals used to make these ancient papers, researchers can pinpoint the exact cities or regions where ancient texts were produced. This means we are no longer guessing where books were written based on handwriting alone. Rather, we can map out ancient trade routes and communication networks with incredible precision. This brilliant, non-invasive dust collection DNA technique is now being looked at to study other fragile artifacts from Egypt, Greece, and Mesoamerica. Experts can finally unlock the secrets of crumbling papyrus and ancient leather without risking any physical damage to these priceless treasures. This entire saga proves that history is never truly set in stone, and the long-held absolute facts of academia can be completely overturned by a single speck of ancient dust. Our understanding of the past is constantly evolving as new tools become available. From a young Bedouin shepherd throwing a rock into a dark cave all those years ago to modern scientists extracting DNA from microscopic dust in a high-tech laboratory, the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls continues to be a living, breathing narrative. It is a tale that bridges the gap between ancient desert sands and futuristic genetic science, proving that the past is never truly dead. What are your thoughts about science and DNA rewriting our understanding of biblical history? Do you think the Essene theory is completely dead? Or is there still more to uncover about that mysterious desert community? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss any update. For more mind-blowing content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.